quorum.
Just so you know, we are recording and live streaming.
Oh. Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right, I'll call this meeting to order. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the January 2023 Program Services Committee meeting for the Children's Services Council of Leon County. By way of reminder to our in-person audience, please complete a comment card and provide them with your sense of claim. We'd like to address the committee in today's meeting. Opportunity for public comment are noted on the agenda. We'll now have the roll call.
Mr. O'Brien, Ms. McFadden,
Here.
Dr. Glenn, Ms. Connor,
Present.
Mr. Jones,
Dear President,
you have a quorum.
thank you. Is there a motion is there a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
So moved. Hold on a second, I'm sorry.
All right, moved and seconded. And we're here. The bench is narrow today. The three of us are doing it all, y'all. I need to do that too, you know, so I'm like, so probably move to second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye, and it's passed unanimously. Thank you so much. Are there any general public comment?
There are.
Yes.
I got here just in time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much. Happy
public
New Year
comment.
to everyone,
Mr. Nielsen.
online and in person. Thank you so much.
Where's the camera?
Yeah, you'll just be right there. It'll pick you up in a minute.
It'll pick you up.
Well, thank you and Happy New Year from me as well to all of you. I hope those of you on the council know that I come here as a cheerleader and not as a critic. I've been a supporter of this council, I guess, from the very first meeting where I spoke. I came today because this committee, the program committee, to me is the heart of the Children's Services Council. You are the place where services meet children. All of the other activities are important. They make the organization whole. The investment committee, the executive committee, and all the others. But this is the heart of the committee. And I'm happy to see these items on the agenda today to move services forward to the children. When I was looking at the timeline not long ago, I realized that we're going to get to the end of a third school year since the referendum passed with only a summer program for children. And I just want you to, it made me think about George Sheldon, whom I worked for here and in Illinois. And anytime we thought we were rushing just as fast as we could to get something done, he would look at me and say, kids can't wait. We have to go faster because every day is a bigger part of the life of every child, and every day is an opportunity to change a child's life. So as you do these things, I hope you will also make it a priority to get the services to the kids. It's important to strengthen the providers. It's important to help more of them come on stream to serve the children. I hope that the program that was brought up but had to be tabled or deferred last time on, what am I thinking of? The gold seal for child daycare. Daycare is especially important in the summer. And if there's a way to get that kind of program back on stream for the summer, I think it would be great and very important to the families and to the children. I'm happy to see or hear or learn that family strengthening is important. You can't serve the children without serving their parents. If I have a moment to tell a story, when I was a trustee at PACE, I went down to the brand new Miami Center for the PACE Center for Girls. And after looking at their new center, I was on my way out and a young girl, a teenage girl, came in with her baby. And being, I guess, a white middle-class parent of teenage girls, I thought, oh, she's had a baby. It's going to sidetrack her career. Her life is changed, and I was feeling sad for her. And at that moment, the staff came out as she came in the room, and they embraced her, they admired her baby, they cheered her on, and I realized that what we really need to be doing is embracing these children who have challenges in their lives, maybe who've made a mistake in their lives. And that's what this That's what this council can do. And I know Liza McFadden has worked hard on investments. I looked at the return on investment on the last item on the agenda, the Early Learning Council. Return on investment is 1,000%. At least that's what you said. So, and I know you're not Elon Musk, so I believe you. But these are great returns on investment in children, and I just hope you will keep up the pace and remember the kids can't wait. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for your comment. Any other speakers?
There's no more public comment at this
All
time.
right, thank you. So friends, Ms. Green, we'll start with the fiscal policies and then we'll come back to me for community discussion.
All right,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much, Chair Jones. So you will have in front of you and you received several documents, the first of which is our CSC Leon County Community Investment Partner. We are calling it CIP Grants Funding Policy. And so you will see that starts on page 3. We have tried to be pretty exhaustive with the policies that will govern our community investment partners. You will see that we go all the way from the funding policy to the roles, the fiscal responsibilities, eligible entities there, the funding and reporting. And then we even outline how we are looking at the upcoming funding. So the summer bridge funding on page 6, then our family support services, and then our innovation funding. We did have in here the rolling funding, which we had discussed at the last program services meeting, but we're doing a little more work on that before we bring it to you as a possibility. And just by way of reminder, we were looking at having periods, maybe twice a year initially, where many funding opportunities could happen. And the committee seemed really excited about that. But we've been trying to work through the timeline on that. And so we'll bring that back to the next program services meeting. So you'll see all of that here. Hopefully you had a chance to look at that. And if you have any questions and want to have some discussion, I will turn it back over to the chair. Let me also say that it is our intent to take these with any changes you might have to the council for their review and then for their approval on our February 2nd. Chair Jones.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Green. Any comments from board members?
You're not surprised, are you?
No, but I mean, this is good. Yes, ma'am.
All righty. So on the very part of the CSC Leon establishment, I felt like the opening line about services was a little restrictive in that when I look, because we can also fund leadership, advocacy, and et cetera. So I'm just wondering if we can broaden that to something like, our focus is to provide leadership, advocacy, and resources to enhance the lives of children and their families. And I think to the commentator's point, the more we can say children and their families, because we did talk about parental support, like to recommend.
Very the beginning.
Very beginning.
First paragraph.
First paragraph. On two different page numbers, but the page 4 under fiscal reporting period. Is this where you're talking about rolling and not October 1 necessarily?
So ideally, once we get the funding moving, we're going to try to start all priority funding on October 1, so that the funding period starts in conjunction with our fiscal year.
So I know we have a fiscal year of October 1, and that's the federal fiscal year. The state fiscal year is July 1. But I would assume we're going to have a lot of groups that are going to be wanting to provide services on the school year, which is much more aligned with the state fiscal year. So it concerns me about starting programming October 1st.
Okay, we can go back and look at that. I know in my experience, when we have funded program, well, when I had to use city and county funding, We just had to roll it into the funding that we already had, and we just had to comply with that reporting period. So that was really our idea. But I think we can
For
look at it.
smaller nonprofits, it'd be more challenging. So anyway, it's just, if you take that back and think about it, on the role of the CSC staff and the review process, where it's talking about why it's going through monitoring. Typically I would think it would be to verify the use of funds as intended versus saying that they're spending within their approved budget. I mean, might use other funds that go over budget. I mean, I'm just trying to think of like what's the best way to kind of show the role there. And I think it's usually to verify the use of funds intended by the organization that's funding them. Okay. Under eligibility, it says it must be, and it lists a bunch of things. And then it says it can be a for-profit, but I'm just wondering if it might be like when you look at grants.gov, which is the federal entity that does a lot of this. They typically say the funding can be, an educational entity, public housing, et cetera, or sometimes it's easier to say you're excluding. So for example, are we going to let individuals apply? That's not addressed. Are we going to let foreign applicants apply? That's not addressed. So, we might want to kind of work on that a little bit. And I was wondering why the language is so strong on, however, a for-profit may apply as long as the project funded does not generate a profit for the organization. I mean, that seems to me, and that's fine. I'm just, usually they just say who's eligible. They don't go into the details. Those details go into other documents.
So we, of course, conferred with other sister CSCs, and as we were trying to look at the desire to be able to allow businesses and for-profit entities, what they brought to our attention is that when they do that, they do require that the program funding not generate a profit for the company. And so we thought it best to go ahead and outline that. To your point, we can go back and look at it and see if there is a way to, I don't want to say soften the language, but if you want to submit like your proposed wording to ensure that that we're meeting what you're saying. But I will say that because it's ad valorem tax revenue, we did want to make sure we were sending the message that we would not be funding for-profits or corporations such that they could make a profit off of those tax revenue.
But I would think given the role of the CSC staff earlier on verifying use of funds as intended, that would cover that. But I don't have a problem with it. It just feels strong, and that's not what I typically see when I look at other sources that say who's communicated. But whatever you all decide on that is fine. I just wanted to kind of point out those issues. Under eligible programs and projects, number 2, I think there's just a typo. The target population for purposes of the CSC funding, the funding is limited children.
2 children. We read it a gazillion times.
To support, or I don't know, yeah. Number 5, CSC will not provide funding to organizations for the acquisition of real property. Are we sure that we don't want to do that? So for example, let's say we had an opportunity to lean in on housing for students who were, getting out of foster care. And it could be even a social impact thing where, we invest in it, but then we end up, as they pay back the rent, making money back as a social impact kind of program. So I just wonder, are we really going to say we can't do any acquisition of real property?
It's the organizations that we're funding, right? We're talking about that. And I think the idea is that we don't need to, I would have concerns about us basically funding the purchase of an asset that has a benefit that lowers to the organization, not our relationship.
Right.
just seems odd.
But let me give you an example. So for example, I was talking with the Community Foundation of North Florida, and they are looking at, housing issues and social impact. And so let's say that we said, yeah, we'll co-invest in, 4 apartments for foster care youth. And
Well, that's the difference between co-investing.
but
versus
some of the monies might be
investing.
used, and if it's a social impact project that we agreed to work on, they could actually pay us back over time, and then we could reuse the money at another time. So, but I'm just saying,
That's a loan, though. That's not a, that's more of a.
it's called a social impact loan. It's not really a true loan, but anyway, my point is, the bigger point is, are we really gonna cut off saying we can't do any when there might be interesting things that could come our way?
I think, well, and I appreciate where you're coming from. However, that's when we look at when a not-for-profit or any human service agency looks at other sources and uses. They do the expansion, and perhaps we may come in and provide the furniture or the furnishing or something like that. But I think you talk about getting into property, it invites the types of applications I don't think that we're really poised to provide support to, particularly when we're talking about the acquisition of property. I think we invite applications. I think we're concerned more about programmatic activity and its impact more so than.
Well, so let me throw out, like, if you have an innovation fund, somebody comes to you and says, we have this great project, it's stackable investment opportunity. We need somebody to come in as the last bit of juice. I don't know, I'm making this up, but I just hate for us to say black and white, we're not doing it, when I don't know that we really have to address it here. And
Well, the concern is if you don't say something, people might use this as a vehicle to basically.
And it'll invite a whole lot of applications, but
Real estate
it's not clarified at the very beginning.
The focus, I think, of the Children's Services Council is to actually provide services. And I think that's built into the body of the name. It would be, I get what you're saying. I could see how you could look at real property acquisition as being an element of a service delivery model. But I think it's a little bit of a stretch, and I would be hard pressed to readily sign up. Maybe you could modify the language and says will not provide funding for the organization for the acquisition of real property unless specifically authorized by, I don't know, unless
Children's Services Council.
unless an exception is made by the, whatever, something that would give people at least a red light to say, okay, I can't use this to buy
I'm thinking more about our innovation fund and what we might do in the future. And, there are ways that you can take this money, invest it in something, get a return on the investment, and then reuse the money later. And taxable credits and housing, whatever, a great way to do that.
So if I might, so anything that is considered a bond deal or anything like that, we can't use the money for any of that. If it's bond is attached.
Well, social impact bond is not a real bond.
Oh,
It's
okay.
just the term that's used. It's a outcomes.
So just for me, if I might, I could definitely see having come from the housing arena, and there are tax credits and things that are done while various entities are putting a deal together to develop housing for children aging out of foster care. I could see us coming in and doing the case, funding the case management model, funding supportive services, funding counseling that go into that building. I think I would be concerned about getting into the acquisition of property, because then property, it's not ours, and the entity can then do whatever they want to with it later. This is a first iteration of this document, and as we move forward and become more, I think, knowledgeable about all of the different things out there, we can relook at this. But I think for our initial funding, we don't want to get into a place where we are offering up money, I think, to purchase property. By the same token, we would, if you are coming with a project, maybe we need to lease the area and it's only going to be for that program, then of course our funding can be used for that exclusively. So it is the will of whatever, the committee wants to do, but it was put in there because again, we were modeling after some of the policies that other CSC doing.
Thanks. You have any other observations?
I only have one, but go ahead.
She's got a.
Oh, I got a couple more. On the disbursement of awarded funds, it says all quarterly disbursements that are based on actual expenditures. So does that mean we don't do in advance at all?
We do, and so we've been trying to go through the document to get reimbursements and disbursements kind of pulled out, so we still have to do another review. Our funding will be dispersed in advance. You give the report, we've
That's
put
what
it
I thought.
against,
So I
yes.
just think clarification of that would be great. I thought it was on H under family support services. For quarterly reports not received in accordance with the schedule, the CIP will assess a late fee of $50 per day. I found that a bit harsh, especially for small nonprofits, and hurricanes happen, all kinds of things happen. And I wonder if one day seems really short, maybe it's after 7 days that it's late, or that, instead of like a fee, and I'm just kind of throwing this out for conversation, maybe they're going to be inhibited from applying in the next round for 1 year or something. That seems really like a lot of money to me for something being a day late, which happens all the time.
So just to clarify, I think what this says is will be assessed the late fee of $50 per day commencing on the day after the report was due. So the reports are due within 7 days after the quarter ends. So the assessment would start on day 8.
I would be opposed against any financial assessment. I think they should collect points that can be used against them. They can use that, their failure to have communicated to potentially debar them from future applications, but $50 a day. And then we collect that money and do what with it?
Reinvest. And it would come off of their next. Again, we were looking at all policies and when talking.
And there are the CSCs that do it.
Yeah, they do it because of just trying to get their data in, but we can absolutely go back and look at points.
I can imagine them doing something that we would vote on, but I would have no interest in that. Just me personally.
But there has to be some ability to hold people accountable if there's no consequence. It's finding the appropriate consequence. It may not be $50.
Well,
So there's got to be something. If they're 7 days late and then they turn out to be 14 days late, 15 days late, a month late, and their position is, hey, it doesn't really matter. There's no penalty. You're gonna have some organizations that are gonna take advantage of that.
And the penalty can be in the awards that's already, that the reimbursements that they have tentatively that are forthcoming.
It's a holding.
Yeah, I mean,
We'll hold future reimbursement.
the whole
Future
I mean,
payments.
that in itself, I think, sends a clear message that, so you get us our report, you're on hold. And you provide some documentation. It's almost like progressive discipline to me, but I just don't.
Yeah.
But
well, we do have, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
No, we do have where the report has to be accepted. We'll review it before we do your next.
Yeah, you also make sure that you have a quality report, not just some
Exactly.
trash.
So
They make to be deadline.
and in here, we have to accept it and then we'll get your next disbursement. So to that point, we can edit that and just make it hold up. I will say that our CSC is proposing to do things differently by dispersing the money ahead of time, because we've heard, repeatedly, when I have to be reimbursed, that means I have to have onboarding money for almost 60 days. So we just wanted to be sure we had some sort of check and balance that you just don't get the money back. So we'll review that.
Well, let me ask you this, and so I'm clear about how we're gonna do this, will some of these edits and changes will we handle in the committee before we take it back to the full body? Is that the intent?
Yes, so what we can do is collect we're taking notes now, collect all of that. We can make those edits before it goes to the full council for them to review, and we wouldn't vote on it for another 2 weeks.
Okay, so we're not taking this to our next meeting, right?
It'll go to the February 2nd, but they don't move on it, and I'm sorry, it'll go to our meeting next Thursday,
So
but we still have 2 more weeks.
we make that determination, right?
You do, but if we delay too much, it's gonna throw our
But my
timeline.
only
For
thing
funding.
is, my only thing is this, right? And I want us to be in consensus as a committee about what we've sent forward. We're gonna make decisions about recommendations coming from all of us now.
Well, we were going to gather them and put them in the
Okay.
document,
That's what I want to
and
share.
then we can send that.
But then I don't want us going to the committee and we're part of the discussion regarding the issues that we take exception.
No, we're taking notes on all of the suggestions you're doing now.
Yes, sir.
No, I just, whenever you're ready, I just.
Are you done?
I know, but I'm almost, budget transfers on page 10. It says, the approved contract program budget must remain the same and no additional dollars, et cetera. And then there's a transfer thing. Seems like a lot of work. In most state grants, they say you can transfer less than 10% from line to line unless it's salary line. And so I just, it seems like a lot of work for you guys in your end for what might be minuscule moving of between lines.
We just want to be able to have documentation that what we don't want is them making the decision and then coming back and telling us. So we were trying to build in a process by which we know that you need to switch some money between lines, and we just approve
There's
that.
almost
through the
never a
computer
grant that doesn't need to happen, and I just worry about the amount of work you guys are making the nonprofits do for every little week, because they gotta move $500 from one line to another. And then you guys have to approve it, and then they can buy something, and I'm wondering if we could just have a little broader policy where if it's less than 10% of the budget, they can move lines around except salaries. Salaries, I think, are a little bit of a different, thing, but I'm just trying to make less work for you guys and the nonprofits.
I think it's wonderful.
Under record keeping and site visits, says there on page 13, 11 on one thing, 13 on below. It says a minimum of biannual basis. Are you gonna do 2 visits every summer program? If not, we just need to clarify.
No, not to the summer program.
I think that's it. Thank you for letting me go through all that.
Thank you. So Brian,
Yes, I just have one, it's more of a question than anything else. And clearly, well, document, I'm assuming it's modeled after the experience of others, helpful from that. I didn't have a lot except for the question on the very end, hold on, let me find that. It's after the conditions, record keeping and on-site visits. In there, it talks about, the requirements that organizations have to basically report out, give us information, allow us to go and do on-site audits, et cetera. But there's nothing that requires them to have an independent audit, which I get because some of these organizations are so small, an independent audit would be expensive and that may not be necessary. And that's why we have our own audits, right? But some of these organizations are relatively substantial and ordering substantial gifts. It depends on the amount. And I don't know if we want to have a trigger point, but some of them, if we're transferring a fair amount of money and they are substantial organizations, they probably are having some sort of independent audit. And at a certain point, I would think we would want them to have an independent audit.
Yes.
Did you see any of the organizations have a threshold upon which the organizations were required to produce something that they would do audit?
Well, from my experience, and I'll ask Holly to jump in here too, because of her experience. If an organization is required to have an independent audit because of their operating budgets or revenues, then that is what we ask that they include in their application. If they do not, then a 990. So if you go to page 11, page 11.
record keeping on-site visits, page 11.
No, I'm looking for the section that talks about the required documentation.
That's record keeping on site. It's
Oh.
11 of 11. So you're looking at- That's what I was reading. They include on-site visits. And,
Okay, so it is page 11, 9 of 11. And so it talks about the required documentation. And so if you go to number 8 on that page, it says either a current independent audit report or an official copy of the entity's 990 as required by the policy and contract. So our thought was that if you are required, because by threshold with the IRS to do an independent audit, then you must submit that. But if not, then you are allowed to submit your 990. Now, that being said, if the council wants to put a threshold on that amount, then the council absolutely can. We do have another entity in town that is requiring an audit irrespective of if your nonprofit is $100,000 operating budget or
Do they
$5
pay for
million.
those audits? But
No.
that particular threshold?
No, the entity is responsible for that.
Wow.
again,
And it has been a complaint, I will say.
and I get that. I mean, I actually do get that. It's not
small.
cheap, and if you're running a $100,000 budget, it's a big whack. But if you're running on a $5 million budget, that's a lot of money flowing in the organization. Now, checks and balances and opportunity for somebody to take a look over the books. You know,
What's the threshold?
There's a risk. I mean, it's
I think
it's the risk of organizations that have a lot of money.
First you asked me that and
I think it's
completely get it
isn't it
wrong.
500,000?
I think it's 500,000 for an independent audit.
That's required for.
Single audit is.
$750.
I know it's 500.
500.
It was. It could be done.
Yeah,
500.
$750. Yeah,
For
So,
we're
Single audit
audits required.
requirements. So
We're not for fun. It was 500 when I was hired 10 years. ago.
yeah, and that's what I was gonna say with CHSP, because
Yeah.
CHSP, not that I know you guys have your opinion, but CHSP does require that whatever that IRS threshold is, then they require.
Oh, you say the threshold is, I thought you said the cost of an audit.
no.
If we're hiring to do audits.
No, good question.
I know it's on the 750. Okay.
So, but again, if.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Over that. Can feel free to look, so they are required to submit the budget, so we will know.
Yeah.
They submit an operating budget of $1 million, then we're gonna expect
Good,
an
but no,
independent audit.
I'm sorry.
I'm just saying the bigger the organization, the more complicated it is and the harder. If we have the ability to go in and do an oversight and audit them, audit that organization ourselves. We don't have the expertise to do an in-depth audit. And it's a lot easier for an organization like that to move and shift monies around. Little organizations, we could go in.
But you're doing.
But when we're going in, we're not going in and auditing their.
No, but it says we can do on-site visits and we can actually,
We could look at their.
we can look at the
stuff,
books.
Right.
And
And
it says we can look at the books.
And I think that's important. I'll give you a perfect example. When we received city funds from the not-for-profit that I manage, we had an annual or biannual where they would come in and they had requested documents, profit loss statements, bank statements. And they'd come in and they'd do a cursory review. They'd want to make certain that they were two signatures on every check, and so that type of thing, that's good stewardship, and we can set the terms by which that occurred. And then, but now if you were an organization that rose to like my organization was small, but Tallahassee Business Consortium was far more significant. That this audit that was described in number 8, they could provide, where I didn't rise to the threshold where I had to provide that.
Yeah.
So I think that type of review, and we just. And I don't know if we put the terms under which we want that information provided. I guess that's what I see here.
Yes, and
Numbers
so,
1 through 8.
yes, so
What we'll be
those
going
are
and looking
documents
at.
that must be submitted before we enter into the contract.
And then, I'm sorry.
And I was gonna say, Sika, what, when we think about arrangements, gifts, programmatic support, on the higher end, how much do you think some of those relationships would cost this organization? Not cost, because that's not the right term, but how much would we be funding on the higher end of some of these? Hundreds of thousands? Several.
So as an example, for family supports, when we come back next month and we talk about family supports, for family resource centers, we're proposing almost $1 million.
So that's what,
500 apiece.
that's what I'm wondering. I'm wondering if there's a threshold, if we give an organization $500,000 a year, should we require an audit is all I'm wondering. And maybe we don't, but I mean, I get that there's a difference between giving someone $15,000 versus $500,000.
And I think
And I'm
that,
guessing if we're giving someone $500,000, that's gonna be an organization that's probably, that's not the only grant it's
Absolutely.
getting. It's gonna be a substantial.
I was gonna say,
So they're probably are gonna be in that higher category. anyway.
exactly, exactly.
I just wanted to clarify this, the state law. So the federal law is the 750,000, the state law in Florida, for charitable organizations. So I mean, if it is in fact a 501c3, it's contributions of $1 million or more have to do an independent audit. And those that are between 500,000 and $1 million have to do a financial statement that's reviewed or audited by an independent CPA. And then those that are less just have to do a compilation
Okay.
audit. And
Well, then
so if we want to maybe just maybe we just reference.
Clarify that they are required, because that's a good threshold.
What a statute
That's
chapter
good
490.
Threshold. So any organization that falls in those categories, what we should put in there is something that requires them to share that information with us, right?
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yes,
That's what I would do. So that doesn't, or then we wouldn't be setting a threshold out there. We'd just be following in line with state and federal guidelines.
yes,
Required.
do that.
And I like that.
we can do that,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right. Anything else?
No.
That's it?
Okay. So what we will do, we're gonna take all of these, Councilmember McFadden, do you mind leaving your? Thank you. And get these incorporated. The document with the incorporated changes will be the one that we provide to the council next Thursday, and then they will have 2 weeks to look at that and give us any input. All right, that's the fiscal policies, Chair Jones.
All right, thank you so much. Now, we'll move to Holly for the draft CIP information security policy.
Hold on a second, we got definitions and funding cycles. We need to go through. That's okay.
We did definitions last.
We did, but you asked us to come back and make sure we had done them, and we did. I do need to bring to your attention, so Chair Jones, I'm gonna thank you.
I've got to run.
Yes, yes, we appreciate you coming in. Okay.
I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Next,
Next,
Next week. I'll see you next week.
next week.
next.
Okay.
Oh, no. Thank you.
On the road.
Councilmember O'Brien had to get on the road, but he came in.
Oh.
For
Good man.
So yes, we did go through definitions, we added some, tweaked some, and so that's what you see here. I do need to bring to the committee's attention that we sent all of the definitions through legal counsel to make sure that they were congruent and not out of step with anything legally and with the Florida statutes. And we did get an opinion back on prize money.
I don't see Mission Creek or welfare pimp.
Right. Right.
All right, no problem. I'm good.
All right, prize money.
I'm sorry, you caught me off guard. Okay. So when we had prize money in there, very simply, money given for winning the prize. Chris Rowe, BMO, he was feeling a little edgy about that. So he gave us an opinion that he asked that I provide to the committee. I should have made copies. But the long or the short of it is, he does not believe that the statute allows for us to give prize money. And it's listed there in that long explanation because of home rule. And while we do not fall under home rule, we are specifically governed by the statute, whereas a city and a county has home rule, so they can change some things depending on what they want to do, what their voters need to do. So as such, he does not feel like we can offer prize money. So he suggested that we take that out of the definition. I wanted to provide that with you. He also said that if you had any questions, you could contact him. Other than that change, these are the changes that incorporate what we did last month. They are ready to go, and if you don't have any questions, I'll turn it back over to, well, no, if you don't have any,
Go to proposed funding cycle.
we can go to proposed funding cycle.
All right.
So if you will turn to page 25. The committee asked that we separate the timeline because it was just a whole lot to try to digest. So that's what we've done. So these are our proposed funding cycles for 23 through 25. So our summer bridge funding would be a managed RFP. We would present the procurement on tomorrow. That's part of our agenda today for you to look at. We'd like to release it on February 6th and do the anticipated contract start date on May 15th. So that's for our summer bridge funding. I know the next logical question is, what are we going to fund? We'll show you when we go through the RFP. The next funding round would be for priority funding, round one, and that would be an ITN for family support services, which we will discuss next month at our program services committee meeting. So we've got listening sessions. We would love to have approval to release this procurement on March 27th with the anticipated contract start date of August 1st.
Okay.
And go ahead.
Your help.
Yes,
Help me with this. You're now presently fully staffed, correct?
no. This is what we've been approved. We're gonna need more staff,
We have other staff in the budget.
not for this year,
So,
but we are taking the budget amendment. The budget and finance.
so for me, as I look at these, this is the first summer and priority funding round one, priority funding. Yeah, I want to go to round two. So priority funding round one, priority funding round, the summer funding.
Mhm.
How is the staff engaged? I'm just curious to know. It's like a whole lot of concentric circles moving simultaneously like a gear, right? So I'm just curious, could you take me through how the staff manages this and the start of this? Because as it's going through the machinations of it, I can imagine one person is completing one task while another one assumes the next.
Yes.
And how they can all run in such close proximity.
So really, so let me start with the RFP ITN process. So those are really boilerplates, to be honest with you. There are pieces of it that are going to remain the same irrespective of the procurement. So it's the scope of work, the timeline, and the contracted funds that go in there. We have been moving pretty fast, and we start one RFP, get that one drafted, start the next one, get that one drafted. So we just kind of all work together to make it happen. So Stephanie does research, passes it to Dina. Dina and Holly work on the RFP piece. I review the RFP piece. We try to get it scheduled for the committees because we're moving fast. And so we end up here. Now, all of that being said, as we get into more procurements, we are going to need more team members. But for these three, we feel like we can handle these three. So if you notice, the ITN for the very last one will not even be released till January. And that was purposeful. Originally, when we talked with the council about this, this was going to be this fall with funding starting in January. There's just no way we can do that. But if we do our summer, we do our priority one, we release our priority two in January, then that allows for us to get our budget amendment done, which the treasurer is already aware that we're coming to him with a budget amendment to bring on additional staff to manage these. The idea being that every October, we will be funding a new one of the priorities that you all said at the top.
Gotcha. All right. Any other questions?
Is there an estimated budget of how much money is gonna go out with each of these areas?
Yes, so with summer funding, if you remember, the council approved 1.5 million for summer funding for priority for the, I flipped too far. For our family support services, between 800,000 and $1 million. And then for prenatal supports, we have approximately, depending on what you decide to do, so it could be as little as 250, as much as. And prenatal, we won't even look at until, this is January, February, March.
What I would add is that this doesn't include the early learning, so that's on top of it.
So this does not include early learning, which is something else we're going to discuss once we get past all of it.
And how much would early learning be?
It depends on what is approved. So early learning, as you know, was a big discussion last month, and those were just our suggestions of what could be investments. We now would like to bring a program that could start fairly immediately, so we can at least infuse some money in that early learning space while we discuss the other options that we have presented.
So,
So that's later on the agenda.
okay. So we're only spending 4.5 to 6.5 million dollars.
At this point, that's what we have planned at this point for these RFPs.
How much do we budget for that?
We budgeted 10 million. So that was with carryover from last year.
I mean, it's kind of concerning to me, so I think we might only, we budgeted that, we might only get half that money at the door.
How is that possible?
So we are working as hard as we possibly can. But when the thought is that we're going to be conservative on staff, then we're doing the best that we can with the staff that we have. Now, I will say when I have tried to bring that up, that is not necessarily met with get the staff you need. So at the next Budget and Finance Committee meeting, I've already alerted the treasurer that I am coming with a budget amendment, and it will include additional staff. But if you recall in the previous meetings when we've had these discussions, it has been pretty clear to me that we are to try to keep it as lean as possible, and that's what we try to do.
I don't know, and I guess that's my fault, that's why I had to leave. I didn't know that we had a staffing crisis that we couldn't respond to. I thought that we were empowered to bring on the staff that you needed and wanted, and we saw persons added to your team. Well, since you were hired. And I guess with $10 million budgeted, and it seems like about $5 million expended, the size of the staff has something to do with the amount of money that we're putting on the street.
Well, the size of the staff is being able to manage the RFP and manage the programming and manage the monitoring and manage the distribution. So it's not just about putting the money on the street, but it's about being able to manage it and effectively ensure that it's
Have we
being.
taken a vote that we could not amend the budget? Is anyone aware of that?
No, we haven't taken a vote. You all haven't voted not to amend the budget. But the budget goes through Budget and Finance. And so as I have presented the budget, I have been asked to be to be very deliberate and conservative, especially regarding the administrative costs. And so that is what I've tried to do. Now with that, understanding the work that has to be done, we're now in our space. We've got the space to be able to host more staff in the budget amendment that will go before the Budget and Finance Committee next month. I will be asking for more staff. I don't know if you all recollect, but when I first was hired, I presented a staffing plan. And that staffing plan was from 22 all the way to 24, and it was incrementally adding staff. And that was not necessarily the direction that I was led to go. And that's what allowed me to bring on first Jacinta, then the next year I was able to bring on Dina instead. So with that, we've tried to come up with a schedule that we know we can manage.
I'm not psychic. But I can imagine that if the board has provided guidance or approved the disbursement of $10 million, that is what we would express as what we would want to see in terms of the values associated with the priority funding schedule that we put forth. And so the amounts that are associated with those rounds are determined by who? Did we make that decision already?
Yes, when the budget was approved in August.
And what funding cycles are not represented here?
So innovation funding. So we've got summer bridge funding represented here. We've got our first priority funding, our second priority funding. Innovation funding is not represented here. We've also done our capacity funding. We're in the process of getting that contract signed. So that line item has been taken care of for capacity building. So innovation is not.
It's the only one that's not.
It's not
And
in
that's,
this
and that,
process.
is that where we would anticipate the remaining $5 million going into innovation?
No, innovation only got, I think it's 1.6. So the bulk of the money is in priority funding, and I think that's 7.5 million.
Is that priority funding one?
So it would be 1, it would be 2, it would be high quality early learning, which we were discussing last meeting. And there was the decision to bring that back to the Program Services Committee. And so that's what we were doing today.
All right, ladies.
Yeah, I guess I'm just a little bit floored that the priority round 2 schedule, you're saying 250K to 2 million.
Well, in our strategic framework, if we go back to the strategic framework, under high quality early learning, we had close to almost $2 million that we were suggesting in high quality early learning. Then there would be about 1.7 million for summer bridge program, because we were looking at summer feeding and then also expanded learning opportunities. Then when we get to family support, we were looking at a total of 2, 3, about 3.5 million would be family supports. Then prenatal and postnatal supports, it ends up being about 2.75 million.
I thought you said 250K to 2 million.
Well, when I looked at it, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the programs we were proposing. So that was 1 is for 250, 1 for 2 million, 1 for 400,000. That's what we were proposing in prenatal and postnatal supports. Now, this is a framework that goes from 2023 to 2025. Then we get to youth gun violence. We just had about 500,000, but that would be in 2024. Then youth homelessness, we really didn't know. We have to do some more investigation there. And then the last one would be apprenticeships and mentorship opportunities. We have 500,000, but we really don't know where that's going to end. So the framework we put together was to go through 2023 to 2025. So we were trying to move in the high quality early learning space so that we could go ahead and get some funds on the street. And we've discussed it a few meetings, but at the last council meeting, there was some consternation and I think some uneasiness about what we had proposed. And that was when it was asked to bring everything through program services. And so that's what we are now doing. So what we were trying to do is get through Summer Bridge today, get through family supports next month and get that ITN on the streets. In the meantime, we will be managing the summer RFP and then managing the family supports RFP. And then we were bringing another idea for our early learning program that would put money on the street starting April 1st to help families now. So that is kind of the summation of what the money would look like in the program.
Thank you.
So we put a timeline together, given what had been approved and the guidance that I was provided and what I knew that we could do and get it done.
Well, I can tell you, because I deal kind of with the same thing. Program administration is in itself its own set of responsibilities. When you then add monitoring to that same set of responsibilities, it does require additional people. Particularly when you want to talk about particularly with what you rolled out at the very beginning. What I will say is, I don't know how this stopped. I don't think it was anyone's, and don't let me speak for anyone else. I don't think I was not aware that we were not moving forward with a staffing plan that would put us fully ready, that when we came out the door with our RFPs, that we would be able to manage the bulk of what we had funded intentionally. I was if there was anything else to be managed, it would be the monitoring piece. Potentially, depending upon, that's why I asked the question about how does this occur with the staff you have, because so much is occurring simultaneously. And so I appreciate the clarification, but I think you need to be prepared. I'm not the one to make the motion, but I would think that it would be the will of this committee that you would bring forth whatever staffing issues you have, especially that we can be able to be responsive. And on our second round of funding, commensurate what the board has agreed upon and has voted to support in terms of the funding for across the expanse of our priorities. And with the timeline as described. And that you would be prepared and equipped and what's the word I'm looking for? Authorized to make those hires, that would appear to me.
I would recommend that you guys consider, since the budget was for 10 million. And I'm assuming maybe this is what you're under the budget committee with, I don't know. We need to get 10 million out the door by December of next year, or whatever, September, right?
In this fiscal year, right?
September 30th. So what are the things that would allow that to happen? And maybe you're saying it's just people, I don't know.
Well, so I'll go back to the early learning piece. So what we have tried to do, or I guess what I've tried to do, is work at the direction of the board, bring recommendations that fall into these priorities. And that's what I've tried to do. So we were a little thrown off last time when there was not a comfort level to try to move forward with what we had presented, because we had presented it, we had talked about it, we've had people come talk about it, but the board was not comfortable with us moving forward and trying to get. No, with our strategic plan here. The staffing plan dates back to when I was first hired. I gave a very detailed staffing plan and a very detailed timeline on how I would bring those on. And it was made very clear to me that the majority of the money needed to go in the community. However, you can't do that without the proper staff to do that. So we have been working along, trudging along, working hours, doing what we needed to do to get it done. At the same time, I also did not, because originally for the second priority, we were going to try to get that out so that it could fund in January, but we would not be able to do that. And so that's why I moved it so that we would issue that in January. So with that, what I will do, given the discussion here, I will pull my staffing plan back out.
Yes.
And I will
Agree.
bring that back out.
I think that, and I would also recommend Now we just went through all of this, and maybe this is something we should talk about. A lot of these entities don't just do one-year funding cycles.
Right.
And, you know, part of it, when you approve the grant, right, even though it'll go over, it's gonna be a 2-year cycle or something. That would go on the books for an expenditure against this year. I'm assuming.
So we agreed that we would do 1, 2, and 3-year contracts, and so that's also laid out.
So I
in the
think that those
policy.
numbers though would then change the numbers you gave us. And so we need to understand better what type of a commitment we're making, and is that money coming basically from this year's pot of money, so that we're able to say, yes, we did commit $10 million. But I think you gave annualized numbers,
Yes, you gave it annualized.
okay, but if you gave contracts that were 3 years or 2 years, then you're at the 10. So I think
Yes.
you maybe some thought around how you show that and discuss it with the board would be helpful. And so we know what are the timeframes for each area, and then how we're getting to that. And I think it's doable from what you guys have, but I think it maybe just not, maybe we're just lined out a little bit, like on a timeline. You can have a timeline, but just.
I guess I thought that's what we had done,
No,
but I
with
understand.
each area, just saying, okay, if this is 4.5 million and there, we estimate, you know,
So we'll add that.
they're gonna be a
estimated impact.
2-year contracts, or they're gonna be 3-year contracts, or what are they gonna be? That's the piece that I think is missing. It's not, that makes it harder to tell the story.
So if it's $10 million, it's a 3-year contract, it's encumbered in this current year.
Well, that's my question, correct? I believe, and that's what I would need to know, but.
I think you need to have well, this committee is recommending that you bring your staffing plan close and the schedule by which we're putting all intended priority funding cycles before the public. I think that as a part of your executive director, well, I'm not telling you how to do it. I prefer to your chair. My recommendation would be that you be prepared to discuss about this, because not only is it the funding cycles, but it is also, it's also congruous, right? Is it congruous or contiguous? But what I'm saying is that the team that we have presently are equipped to come up with the RFPs and the RFP schedule that requires additional funding to manage said RFPs and provide the money. And so if we have blindly moved forward without taking that into consideration simultaneously, while this occurs, that's also a part of the moving piece, making sure that you are equipped and authorized to provide, to hire the people that all this successfully occurs. And I'm all for leading that being a part of what we report out of this committee. You all agree with me in that regard? That is a part of our recommendations for the programmatic committee, that we also recommend that the executive director be authorized to complete the recommended staffing plan such that we can be able to put forth the RFPs and ultimately be able to provide the type of monitoring as described in our schedule. And and I guess what's not entirely untoward, these decisions that we're making in the conversation that we're having have fiscal impact. And that fiscal impact is seen in the hiring of additional personnel. So that way it doesn't, so yes, go forth and prosper. But we'll.
Remember the old adage, when you want something on the table.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, so thank you for making us aware, and we're happy to champion that from this committee, because it all goes together, right?
Right.
I can't change the bus zone and give her more
But
kids.
you-
Don't give her more.
I
food
was
for
a
more
lot
children.
with foundation, basic rule of foundation, you need one person for every $1 million. I can't tell you from a government entity how that works, but you could probably do an
It's the
analysis
same.
with the CSCs and get that
It's the
data.
same.
Okay, so that's, I mean,
And my
that's a
staffing
general,
plan had
okay,
18.
that's a general rule of thumb.
Got it. 8.
Oh.
8, not 8.
Okay.
We don't need 8.
All right.
So with the timeline, we do plan to share those out at Thursday's meeting and then.
All right, we're ready to go to item
That's why-
6.
So. Item 6, yes, so we
All right.
are talking about it.
Holly,
Hi,
you've
so
got 10 minutes.
I will be quicker than that.
Great.
The data and system security draft as kind of presented for you was built using 2 primary sources. The first was Leon County Schools in terms of how they communicate and require, in their case, teachers to input information into their data system. And that's kind of like the first half and modeled a little bit after that. And then the second half of the policy is language taken directly from our database developer, which is web author. And so there's certain pieces about incident handling and activating the incident response team and how user names and passwords are issued that are taken directly from the guidance that they have provided to us. But that kind of first step was just letting folks know when it comes to data security and what they will be inputting into what we are referring to as SAMIS currently, which is our Services and Activities and Management Information System. It just enumerates the responsibilities of CSC Leon, administrators for programs that we fund, and then any users that are assigned a username and password at those programs. It should be fairly straightforward, but I'm here to answer any questions about the proposed policy and make any suggestions so that it can be included for final review by the council at next week's meeting and hopeful approval and adoption on February 2nd. The reason in terms of including it is to, as we make the RFAs available, they will be required to use our data system as part of their funding and therefore adhere to these policies.
Chair Jones?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't have any questions about the policy. I think it's great. Mike, I have a question though related to the policy, and I know I asked it before and you guys are going to look into it. Do we have cyber insurance?
Yes,
Thank you.
and have had it for a while.
Okay.
Good.
Yes.
Member
And web
Carter.
author has the insurance, so.
Right. All right,
Web author
next.
has it as well.
Oh, yes. and
Treatment
Web author
and
does
draft
as well.
RFA for summer bridge funding.
Okay, so summer bridge funding. So if you go to page 33, that is the draft of our summer bridge funding. Hopefully you've had a chance to read it. There are about 5 different things that I need to go through with the committee so that we know how to move forward before we
All right,
finalize the
number
draft.
down, let's go.
Number 1, so this is one RFA for summer learning and summer feeding. I think our desire is to do 2 separate because it would be easy. Don't know whether the committee has an opinion.
What?
I didn't understand that either.
Okay, we have one RFA in your packet for summer learning and summer feeding. So 2 service lines. We would rather separate the 2 for data purposes.
Yes,
And so we just didn't know whether the committee would have an opinion.
that's fine.
Okay.
I do have a question about that though.
Yeah.
The only thing that would maybe you may want to think about if you do separate them, you're not going to have as good information because under your proposal narrative 0.5 on C2, you're requiring programs to include provision of balanced nutrition, breakfast, lunch, snack, which I have a question about, but anyway, I'll hold it. And if you're getting another offer, you're going to not know if you're getting duplication potentially.
Well, if we separate them, the summer feeding would strictly be on meals. So it would be, so one of the options.
I guess what I'm saying is if you've already told them they have to do it, and then the other RFA or ITN or whatever it is comes out, how do we know they're not going to get duplicated thinking they're going to serve the same groups?
No, if we separate it, we will delineate that because they would not be the same. We would be funding summer feeding for actual meals and ideally meals for the family. So for example, summer break spots already happened, but for summer break spots, the child has to consume the food at the break spot. So there could be a funder, i.e. us, that comes in and funds a piece with that allows food to be taken home. So that's different from the food that's provided at a summer learning opportunity.
Right.
And a lot of summer learning opportunities already have other sources.
Right, they have feeding.
Right, they got the agriculture, well, yeah,
Right.
you call it the right hotspots.
Summer break spot.
Right, so it doesn't necessarily have to be intended. What it does do for us, if we are funding a separate line item, can also show additional impact.
Yes.
Okay.
And if we separate them, it allows us to truly show the impact from the summer feeding, separate and apart from just requiring that our programs have that food component. So that's number one. Number two, so when we talk about, if you go to page 2, number, Yes.
I'm not, I don't want to get into the weeds on it. I would hope that we can find a way. But there's already existing activity. Those hotspots, what those hotspots permit, that type of thing. You don't have to be in a they have their own full-fledged marketing campaign. I would hope that if we were to go into summer feeding, different than what Second Harvest, their pantry programs, or what they do, then there might be targeted populations that are not being served that could be identified by respondents. Homeless children, transitional children, that type of thing. No, but I would hope, yeah, because just to layer it on already existing activity does seem duplicative, as you described, and not necessarily a waste, because I'm sure that people want it or need the food, but
more impact.
more impact.
So to that one of the questions that we have for you
That point, that's why you had to ask a question, right?
is, so that's the next question. Do we want to target the code? Do we want to target for both of these programs? I think for one, we have a target of 35%. I think that's summer learning. And then for feeding, a target of 50% in specific zip codes or neighborhoods.
When you guys, last year used the wording priority for 32304, as I remember, something like that. And then it really worked. But you didn't have to go out and put a certain percent. I feel like the percents kind of get challenging to follow and for you guys to track and for us to know. And I just think if you prioritize us 32304 and whatever else, I think it seems like that was enough of a push last time.
Got it.
Those footprints, those census tracks.
Did we give extra points?
Mr. Chair, if I may, we did actually give extra points. I think that there were several programs that earned those extra points and then in their reports did not meet the expectation. And so I think maybe if we don't put it as a percentage point of what they, of like who they actually will target, and we just kind of leave it open, that maybe part of their performance report could be, did you actually meet the targeted areas that you wanted to? I think that that's was the issue of why we are suggesting potentially to include those expectations. Because while they said they were going to do it, and I think overall we did. Overall, it was like
Overall, the numbers
we do.
Those are priorities for us,
right.
right? That may not necessarily be the priority of the respondent, and it's our money, so we get to set the priority. And for the census tracts, the zip codes that we know, based upon our data and all that we did with the, to identify these particular census tracts, we want them to put emphasis there, right? That's not to say that other areas are not being served, because that's why they may fall short. But if you set you got to set the bar for the people to rise to it. And I don't think that should be absent from what we're.
No, but I have a question on the priority points. To your point, it's a good one. If they didn't do the service in the area they said, at some point, were we just moving too fast last year? We couldn't have just stopped payment or slowed payment?
We could not have, we were moving fast last
Right.
year and we dispersed everything all at
Is
once.
that a potential other way to do it this time, to say instead of a percent, saying if in fact you don't meet, if you say you're going to serve these zip codes and that's not where we're seeing your individuals come from, we're going to stop payment and be really upfront about it.
Yeah, so for summer, we had 2 payments, so we could build that in.
It might be just
Absolutely.
easier for you guys.
Yeah, we could absolutely.
And
build that.
if they know it up front, that it's money on the line, I think it's a better incentive.
I behave.
Yeah.
I comply.
Right.
All right, what you got next?
Okay, so we were talking about the ranges for funding, so I'm actually gonna turn it over to Holly. Because we have just a slide, because we're trying to decide what the committee's will is regarding ranges for funding, and it's different for summer learning versus summer.
Got 9 more minutes.
Okay,
So I'm so sorry, I didn't prepare a slide specifically for this, but in essence, for thinking about ranges of funding, we talked with Miss Liliana Murphy from the Florida After School Network, who was the state director of 21st Century Programming. And she kind of talked through what the Florida Department of Education does for their summer programs of like what a funding cap might be. So the question is, do you want to allow applicants to apply for whatever they want to apply for to be able to achieve it? Or do you want to set some expectation for them to, if they're only projecting to serve 25 kids, this is the maximum that you can ask for. If you're wanting to serve 100 kids, this is the maximum you're asking for. So if you'll give me just one moment. I agree.
so
Let the
no, so
reviewers
don't
handle it.
don't worry.
I think there may be a max. I think there ought to be thresholds because we're only serving a particular quarter. Talking about 3 months, so there might be max there. Potentially,
The reviewers do a great job of bringing it back.
but how much money are we putting on the street for the summer?
Right now it's 1.5, but at any point you guys can increase it.
You don't want to put a threshold on it in terms of the amount
The
that we.
reviewers are.
Last year, we had 1.56 and we spent 1.53.
That's what I said, the
Oh, okay.
reviewers are doing a good job.
And there was no threshold.
No, we had
Okay.
$4 million in requests, but the caveat is one of them made a mistake, so it's probably closer to 3 million.
Okay,
And we
all
funded
right,
half
all
of
right,
that.
all right.
All right, so that
So-
answers that question.
It would just go into the scoring then. The
Correct.
scoring does include, the scoring metric.
Now, what I,
When you can decide on the point, but the scoring metric does include a point for the cost per child calculation.
gotcha. Now, let me tell you what my concern is. I wasn't at the meeting. But I want you to know your voice was heard loud and clear. How are we doing the breakdown across, our, what's the word we use, our priorities? I remember Carmen saying last year, that was with the programs that we funded last summer, she did not see her children. Did you look at your comment last year about?
Yeah, well, it was the side of town that some of these activities were.
I just want to make certain that we have that there's a method in place by which the diversity is found in the programs that are funded. To include, so across our early learning, postnatal, prenatal, all of that, that there's somehow the reviewers are taking all that to account.
Carmen shared, she's in 310, and I don't know that we gave as much emphasis to that. So why don't we add that zip code in, and that might push that service delivery there. And maybe you guys can look at the other data. There might be, instead of just 304, there might be a few that we need to put in.
And I think if I remember well, Councilmember Connor, it was where the camps were being held, the kids could not get there, and transportation and things like that. So if you had Teampreneur, but the Teampreneur program was on Thomasville Road. So you would have to try to get kids from 10 up there. If I remember, that was one of the things you talked about as well, where the camps were actually being held.
Right, and the other piece was I think it was at Governor's Charter, it was something that was held there and they provided transportation, but our parents didn't want their children to travel that far. So if it were closer or if they were in our area, that would make, but that was.
I just want us to learn from what we
If there's
did
a
last
way
year.
for pop-up activities in those areas, that they physically need to happen in that area, not that they're gonna pull the bus, but that's just not a good idea.
Got it.
Okay.
All right. And then the last thing is the
I
actual.
do have this part.
I'm sorry, okay, so the last thing is the scoring criteria. So if you go to page 10, which is page 42 of your packet, you'll see scoring criteria. We are trying to make sure that we are putting a provider presentation in there, which was requested by the council. And so we are wondering if you want that presentation to be included in the scoring, or if it is just one of those things so we can see what's going on. So you'll see up there, this is a draft of what we're proposing. So profile 20, narrative 40, budget 30, presentation 10. I will say my recommendation is that presentation not be more than 10 points. But we just want to, before we print it, make sure you guys are okay with it. If that looks good. All right.
I don't want to provide a presentation. At all.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
I don't like to provide a presentation at all.
To be scored at all.
That has nothing to do with content and ability to serve.
Okay, so we roll those points into, where would you want those points rolled?
I would argue that provider presentation makes them stand up and say what they're saying, because sometimes you can get somebody that's a great writer to write a grant. And you want to see the people that are providing the services and ask the questions and know that they have the hardest schedule.
We're talking about an interview here?
No,
No, just a presentation
A
of what they're
presentation.
doing.
so they would get 20 minutes to give us a presentation. And then the question with the presentation would be, do you want to decide what they need to present? Or provide any elements that we want to hear, or just let them have the 20 minutes to talk about it?
I find like when you do it for the state, they don't really give you a ton of direction. You go in and sell yourself.
Well, then that's what we do.
I don't like it, but let me tell you why. And you know, Mrs. Green, you remember CHP,
Yeah, CHSP.
we would go and they would make the greatest presentation in the world. And their deliverables, they didn't document, they didn't turn in their forms on time. I just think that's is specious, right? I would rather that we award points to perhaps other sources and reach other sources that are being a companion, that they're not just counting on our money to get the job done. I wouldn't mind seeing the points awarded that they're bringing other resources to.
Wouldn't that be part of the budget? They have to put who's the match. Didn't we require that last year?
So last year, we did 10 points for organizational profile, 40 for narrative, 25 for budget. The proposed deliverables 15 and special designations 10. So that's kind of how, so we didn't have presentations, but the council did say they wanted presentation. So the question for me would be, do you want to score it or not?
Well, let me just say this, and you will really appreciate this. I present well. But that doesn't mean that I'm gonna get the job done. And I just think that, I think provider presentation is about personality. And personality is,
But it's only 10 points.
I just don't think it could be, I defer, I'm not gonna die on this hill, but, you know, but I just think that.
I've been trying to remember that phrase and I keep saying it, and I kept saying, I'm not gonna die on the sword. Like, no, you die on sword. Phrase.
Or this switchblade, I'm just not. I defer to my colleagues, but I would hate for someone to really. And then I would, let me ask you this too, right? Another scoring criteria for us to consider is if they have been funded by us before and if they did it successfully. So when you talk about dinging somebody for $50, right? What about if they've already been in the system? It doesn't adversely affect them. It could be an additional point or an asterisk or a notation on their application that they have successfully participated with us. It may be found in the organizational profile, but I just think that ought to be a point of consideration, those who successfully managed our monies in the past.
We can do that. We really have only had one funding cycle. And
Right.
it was so I don't know that is the judgment. No, I just mean we didn't require a whole lot. And so I think we can absolutely asterisk. I don't know that I would recommend giving them an extra point or two, but we can asterisk and definitely notate it. So decision, provider points or no?
Tiebreaker.
I think, I don't have your experience with having had this experience before, but my own experience would be when I do interviews, people are great on that interview, and they've sold themselves, but then when they get to do the work, then you're like, oh man, I should have, So that preparing before being a great presenter, you can do that all day, but can you perform on the other end? That's kind of where I see it. Oh, I have to break this tie? Oh, my God. The dog and pony show for me doesn't sell me. I need to see what you're worth.
So you're saying no points.
I would say no points for
All
that.
right, let's move on.
So we'll do no points. We are gonna require that. We
I'm
are, no, we are
You
gonna
don't want to-
require that. And we're gonna require that they do it. And if they don't do it, then we'll figure something out. We'll figure something out on that. Okay.
But I mean, and let me tell you something, the provider presentation is good. They will find ways to reflect that in those other points. Because they're going to be talking about the information provided there, their profile, their narrative about the project that they're going to be doing and how they intend to be good stewards of the money that is presented to them. They'll find ways to put that in there.
Okay, but let me also make sure that what I'm hearing is the presentation can happen, you just don't want it
Correct.
forward.
Yeah, I don't care what you.
Okay. Last thing on the agenda, Chair, if I may.
Wait, I have on program application.
Yeah.
Review a couple comments.
Yes, I'm sorry,
okay.
Councilman.
Page 34, under eligibility preference is given to not-for-profit entities with a current IRS determination status. That makes it sound like for-profit entities get a lower scoring.
Okay, and no, that's not true.
But yes, so could we,
No, that's not true. Okay, I'll change that.
That for-profit gets lower scoring?
that's how.
Technically, that's how it would be in the scoring. If they are a nonprofit, then they would have scored higher. That's how it's written currently.
Yeah, no, we don't want that. I
Okay.
missed that. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Page 36. It's so specific on the including breakfast, lunch, or snack. What if it's an evening program, which I know we need more of? What if it's a weekend thing? I don't know that, like, where it says full day supervision, at least 7 hours a day, but I just feel like maybe go through some of this and start thinking a little outside the box, whether it's weekends, nights, et cetera, then you can't be as prescriptive about
Okay.
the services. And then, my own thing on the summer feeding is, I've talked about this before. There was a lot of COVID money that came in for that, and I was saying you need to be really super careful about that duplication issue, and you brought that up too. And then the last thing is page 42. All proposals, second sentence, volunteers of Leon County have a vested interest in the defense of children and youth services. And again, if we could say children and families, because we're trying to serve families wherever we have that designation. That is page 42.
Page 42.
Okay.
And it's in a few places.
I have the original. I don't have the 40. What is that?
It's 9A,
Thank you.
under 9A, first paragraph.
Yeah.
So
And
children.
that's it.
families.
Thank you.
All right, our next meeting dates.
Wait a minute, hold on, we got one more we'd like to just give you real quick, and then we promise we're gonna let you go. So we have included in your packet a proposal for early learning project there. And so it is on page 45, and it's a collaborative partnership with the Early Learning Coalition to create a local funding category that will allow Alice families to enter into school readiness. Just to summarize it, Alice families, what they're finding, are not able to enter into school readiness. And so this would be an on-ramp program whereby if we entered into the agreement, CSC would pay for the first month of the childcare for that family, then that allowed ELC to transition them into school readiness, which will pay the next 11 months. So the leverage you see here would be a requested funding
It's
amount
huge.
of 250, and the return would be 2.8 million. They could serve for the 6 months that would start April 1st. They could serve 505 kids, and we could see how that could go. And if it goes well, we may be able to take that investment further.
Is there a
to serve more
recommendation
kids.
for approval?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Is this a sole source contract?
It is. This would be done through early learning because early learning is the sole source that qualifies for school readiness and beacon.
That I would move approval.
Madam.
Yes, I.
Second. Girl, you know, step up.
I was so excited. This is, you know, this rings.
I know.
You answered the details. I'm with you, Fran. So we got a motion to approve and to second.
So we're gonna take this to the council. on
Yes, from the program
Thursday.
services.
Yeah,
Committee, yes.
Absolutely.
And it's been properly moved to second, and all those in favor, signify by saying aye. All right, thank you.
That has made us very good.
So let me ask you this, who's gonna present? Will early learning present or will we present?
Early learning will be present.
Present and we'll present?
We'll present, and then they can answer any questions that the council might have.
All right.
Do you guys want my notes from that other?
Absolutely.
This is.
If you could read,
You should always come prepared to leave your notes.
I love it.
Councilmember McFadden.
Yeah, I like to run a paper anyway, so that's super.
So that is it.
All right, our next meeting is February 9th. This for this committee, right? Or our
Yes,
next
and
meeting,
we need you here.
Right, and our next meeting agenda will include discussions on family support services priority funding. All right, any final member comments for the good of the order?
I will be in DC on February 9th.
Okay,
February 9th. Wait a minute.
it's a Monday.
No, it's not.
No, it's not. It's a Tuesday.
Is that Mardi Gras?
That's not the right date then. It's supposed to be the,
No.
Yeah,
it said
Thursday.
February 9th should be a Thursday.
A Thursday.
I'm sorry, it is a Thursday, it's a T. I just looked up, but I'm still in DC.
Okay. It's a Thursday.
I have blueprint meeting. That's why I know that day.
Okay. We thought we had the blueprint schedule. We were trying
There's I
to.
have blueprint meeting on that day.
They haven't published it on their website.
They haven't published it.
You need me before that, you like,
No, we're subscribed.
We're subscribed.
yeah, we have our,
Okay.
and that's my meeting, so I'll be presenting my disparities.
And they're always on Thursdays.
They are always on Thursday.
Yeah.
You probably need to change the reoccurring.
Well, we only meet like 6 times a year, compared to the city and the county that meets every 2 weeks.
I'll look at the date.
But I'll support
They
you.
might run into,
Haven't published them.
but they might run into these.
So what we do know is the meeting will be here. That's what we do. Okay,
Well,
so we'll figure it out, but we know, Councilmember McFadden, you won't be in town
I'm in town Monday and Friday, though.
Monday and Friday. Monday
Yeah,
and
I will
Friday.
not be here.
How about Friday
Yeah, I'll be
night?
here.
Yes.
Monday.
Everybody want to move for adjournment?
Is there a motion to adjourn? All right.
All right. Thank you all so much.